Greetings and salutations, YouTubers and malefactors. We're back here at StopLogic Inspections instead of Motorsports, I know. Doing a final inspection on a house that's about to close and should be the last time that I'm visiting here. But my day job, instead of just riding dirt bikes all the time, is a building official. So if you know what a building inspector is, imagine that I'm the manager of the building inspectors. We're going to go ahead and do a full final inspection as if, you know, I was getting paid to do this on a daily basis. And we're going to go through step by step. So for our first step, visible from the right of way, you must be able to have a high contrast address visible from the right of way. You're only required to have one, we have two. Now, a couple of the builders out there that might have argued with me in the past thinking that black letters on dark brown is high contrast, not really the case. Our next step is we look for the customer shutoff and the PRV. So over time these things have become buried and you're not allowed really to alter anything on the city shutoff. But this is where you would shut off your water if you're replacing cartridges for showers or for sinks or anything of that nature. You would shut off the water here. And a PRV is what's called a pressure reducing valve. So the safe operable pressure for a house water supply is between 40 and 80 psi. Anything over 80 psi could result in damage to your plumbing. So some cities mandate that PRV is installed on every house. Some cities just mandate it for houses that test over 80 psi. Here in Hutto, they mandated it for every single house. So you'll check for the presence of the PRV. That's important for later. So as an inspector, you usually aim to walk your houses the same way every time. Normally when I'm doing a frame or a final, I'll start by walking the outside, usually right going left, and then I work to the inside every single room sequentially. So one of the first things I'll check for is any sort of like missing siding, any sort of caulking that needs to be done on any seams, functional hose bibs with vacuum breakers, which are required by Texas state plumbing law, that your T&P line has between 2 and 24 inches of clearance to grade, that your siding has usually 6 inches to grade. This house is settled a little bit. So if you have brick, you're only required to have 4 inches to the dirt, stucco 4 inches, siding 6 inches. And we have our secondary, our pan drain, our primary, and if you have a dryer vent, you have to make sure it doesn't have insect mesh in it. So you have to have a damper, a backdraft damper, which is what we have there. If you see insect mesh in that, it traps the lint and your house catches on fire. I check to make sure that we have a line of sight disconnect for a AC, which it is line of sight. You have to have 24 inches access to walk up to it. And at no point can you reach over a hot appliance and use the means of disconnect, because if there's a electrical fault in this, you don't want to be in physical contact with something that will electrocute you. And it only takes 10 amps to kill a human being. This is 30 amps of power right here. It'd be a very bad day. The next thing I'll generally check for, which the HVAC contractor didn't get right, is Freon locking caps. Those are required by the EPA. And I might go up to Home Depot if I'm feeling particularly motivated to switch them over. But I'm not a licensed HVAC technician anymore, so technically this should be done by your HVAC contractor. And it's these special caps that you can't unscrew and have people steal your Freon. The next thing I check is AHRI sticker. This will give you all your relevant information of what the SEER is, which it's a 14 SEER system. 36K is 3 tons of AC. But the part that I'm really concerned about is minimum circuit amps. So the minimum size breaker for this is 20 amps, the maximum size is 30 amps. So let's say you say, Mr. StopLogic, what happens if my breaker's smaller than 20 amps? Well, every time this kicks on, it'll shut right back off on you. It's called nuisance tripping. Okay, smarty pants. What is it, what's the importance if I have a 40 amp breaker or a 50 amp breaker? Well, you want to match the breaker range, because if your breaker's too large for the HVAC system, if there's a fault in the system, your main panel can catch fire. It's a very important thing for your inspector to check. And then you'll make sure that you have eave venting, unless the houses are 10 feet or closer to each other. Then at that point you'd have to have a sealed and fire rated soffit. And then over the HVAC system, you check for a rainwater diverter, because rainwater pouring directly onto the AC system shortens its lifespan dramatically. A 20-year AC system without a rain diverter is now a 10-year AC system on average. We'll continue with the outside. Look for any sort of issues of, I guess, weep holes not being drilled in the brick and stone. By code, you have to have one every 30 inches, which you have them across this angle iron or flitch plate or lintel, steel lintel, depending on the generation of builder you are. And then generally you'll have the top of this lintel flashed, and then you'll have a little bit of brick break underneath it. So this one I saw built, the brick break was cut a little bit short on this one. And normally you're supposed to see just a little bit of plastic lipping out from the bottom of that. You check and make sure all of your lights, if you have carriage lights in the garage, your windows, everything's caulked in. And we keep on going. Now bear in mind this is an 12-year-old house now. So some of this caulking is starting to come up a bit. But for the most part, everything seems to be fairly well handled. And there's no visible lintel on this. So we have caulked windows, caulked in doors, and if you are brave enough to stick your finger in these lintels, you'll feel a little bit of plastic material in there, but generally wasps like to make their homes in that. One spot that's commonly missed is columns generally don't have their weep holes cut. This house had the weep holes cut after the fact because I had them re-drill all of these weep holes when we closed on the house originally. You check to make sure your step flashing appears to be in place, that you have kick flashing. The flashing right there by that piece of wood could use with being reattached, but I'm not doing any exterior work to this house. So it is what it is at that point. So the AHRI sticker, this is where it becomes important. And also, all of your electrical boxes, any penetrations on electrical boxes, you have to have the top and side sealed, and then you're supposed to have a little bit of weep underneath, which you've got a little bit of weep hole that I cut in myself. And here's the AC. We have a 30 amp breaker, which is good. 30 amp for the dryer, that's average. 30 amp for the water heater, so on and so forth. Now, these indelible tags are okay per code, but if you were to see like ballpoint pen in here, as an inspector you would immediately fail that, because ballpoint pen is not indelible writing. So you'd either have to have it tagged, taped and tagged like this, or you would take and have a Sharpie written. And the best product for Sharpie for this is the black Sharpie with the red lettering, because it's fully indelible. Now bear in mind, houses that have been built after November 16, 2020 also require a whole house surge protection system, which isn't required on houses this age. But let's say if you ever update this service, when they install a new service, they have to put in a type 1 or type 2 surge protector between the meter and the main circuit for the house. It's just something to bear in mind. It came out with this last iteration of code. So I use a little touch up on the caulking on the windows, but as I said, this isn't a brand new CO inspection. This is a 10-year-old house. So the next question I'll generally get is, okay, well with the Hardy plank, are you required to caulk all of these seams? Technically, no, you're not required to caulk them per the manufacturer. That's more of a fit and finish deal if you choose to do so. As far as fences go, unless the fence is over 7 feet in height, it's exempt from building codes, so we generally greatly ignore them. A functional hose bib on the back. Light, which is mostly still caulked. Rear door, which is mostly still caulked. Top windows could use a little touch up on the caulking, but it's about average. And we have our handy dandy GFCI tester. So we're going to check and see. So this circuit has been tripped. I need to go through my GFCIs and verify they're all set. So when the last inspector is here, they likely tripped the GFCI breaker. So let's check the garage GFCI. So all the exterior GFCIs are attached to the garage breaker. Kitchen GFCI is its own separate breaker, which we will test. And then each bathroom, I believe 2 of the bathrooms here are tied onto the same GFCI, which is not against code. It's just a bit of a nuisance. All right, so here's our GFCI here. It's been tripped. We check it. It's been wired correctly. Press the button, trips it. Now on the exterior, you'll generally spot check these, but you can go through and test every one. The only downside is with testing each and every one that you've got to walk back to the garage every time. So you'll see that it's wired correctly. And we'll go back to the garage. I am going to test this rear one just to make sure, since we weren't able to test it earlier in the video. Now mind you, I usually move a bit quicker when I'm doing an inspection. It's a bit more to do what you do for a living and explain every step of it. So let's see. We have both lights on and we just tripped it. Both lights turned off. One other thing to bear in mind when you're doing a final inspection is that you verify that there's a 2% slope from the house. So normally I'd be carrying a 3-foot digital level, and I would measure the middle of the house, the middle of the back of the house, each corner, the middle of the sides, and the middle of the front, and verify within the first 10 feet you have 2% slope away from the house. And then you have what's called a cross-sectional slope, and you'll notice there's slope away from the house if you look. But equally as important to verify that there's slope away from the house is cross-sectional slope. How does the water get off of your lot? So on this you'll have what's called a drainage swale. Basically it's a fancy word for low spot between a couple of houses. You have a swale in between the 2 houses on the property line, and you verify that's also at a 2% grade. Now per code, on cities that have adopted the 2009 and newer editions, the cross-sectional slope just has to say significantly drains. Older codes, you're required to meet that 2%. The deal is 2% is going to be significant drainage anyway, so that's what you would check if you were doing an inspection. And the last thing before you go inside is also check and make sure that your shingles have drip edge. And drip edge is this little metal doohickey underneath the shingles, so when it rains, the water doesn't trail back under the shingles and rot your roof deck. So now we're to the garage. We're going to touch on the most important part of this so far. So that PRV I mentioned earlier creates what's called a closed loop system. Water doesn't backflow across a PRV very well, so you'll install what's called an expansion tank. When you have a water heater with a PRV, you're going to have an expansion tank. Now you're going to say, oh, Mr. StopLogic, I have 2 water heaters in my house. Do I need 2 expansion tanks? The answer to that question is yes and no. If you have 1 expansion tank for 2 water heaters, it has to be large enough to serve how many gallons of water heater that is there. If you're plumbing the water heaters in series. Now, if you're in the city of Pflugerville, plumbing water heaters in series is specifically prohibited by the city. And I'll explain kind of why you don't want to have them in series anyway. But at any rate, we'll carry on with the inspection. This is a TMP line. This is the most important part of your water heater. This is where we want to make sure that there's no traps, no uphill portions of it, that it's not done with PEX or Schedule 40. This is CPVC, so this is rated up to 180 degrees, and the first 6 inches of it is copper. So what happens is, if you watch Mythbusters video, if the TMP fails, these can build up enough pressure to go through 3 floors of a house and shatter a foundation. Water expands about 1,200 feet per second when it's pressurized. And as an inspector, it's your most important thing is to verify this TMP is working. Yeah, you have to verify for insulated pipe, for expansion tanks, for a line of sight disconnect from the water heater, which technically the circuit breaker, if the breaker for this is in here, is line of sight. Or per code, if they have a lockout tagout breaker, you don't have to have a line of sight disconnect for a furnace or for a electric water heater. If you have a gas water heater, you would make sure that the gas line is fully connected, that you have a 3-inch drip leg, which since we don't have a gas system here, it's a little hard to show that. And you would make sure that there is no overt leaks. It would be leak tested before you get to final, but if you smell any gas in the house, immediately discontinue the inspection and require another leak test. So we've gone past the water heater. Everything on that checks out. The GFCI breakers check out. Per code, we don't really care if you have a garage door opener or not. Not our problem, though we do have to have a light. And then we check and see if there's arc fault breakers in all houses that were built under the 2011 and newer National Electrical Code, NEC. So every bedroom up to the 2020 code requires an AFCI breaker, which is an arc fault breaker. Slightly different than a ground fault breaker. And every bedroom has a AFCI. What an arc fault does is if it detects like an arc, essentially like a short where it would possibly cause a fire, it kicks the system off. And it's kind of an important function nowadays. These are older arc fault breakers, but they still meet the code. GFCI is a ground fault interrupter. Ground fault will detect like if there's a sudden surge, kind of like a something that would normally trip a breaker anyway, an overcurrent, and it stops that overcurrent at 500 milliamps. Which basically, when you're around a wet area, these are installed to keep you from electrocuting yourself. You'll get enough of a bite to make your life difficult, but not enough of a bite to make your life non-existent. Alright, so we're moving on. The next thing we check for so we do have a doorbell, it's just not fully dinging. We check to make sure the exterior lights work, and then every part of the house that we walk through. And the way that I do it is if I'm walking a 2-story house, I turn on every light as I enter a room to verify that they all work. Oh man, I need to turn off the heater in here. This is terrible. Ugh. We're up to almost 80 now. We check to make sure we have insect screens up. You can do that from the outside or the inside. It's a matter of preference. Check to make sure the AC turns off and the heat turns, well, AC turns on, heat turns on. You check basically for functionality. You can wait around for it to have a 1 temperature difference, but on anything but a gas system, that's not going to be an instantaneous test. That's 5 or 6 minutes of waiting, sometimes up to 10. You make sure that you have hot water. You make sure that your breakers in the kitchen pop. And it looks like the painters took off one of my GFCIs. Now when you're doing this test, you always make sure that none of these lights other than these two are on. So the entire kitchen is ground fault protected. Now here's kind of a code that not a lot of inspectors are actually familiar with. Yeah, that's hot water. So per code, you're supposed to have a garbage disposal. All right, that's fine and dandy. A lot of builders will put them only in the area under the sink, which is actually not okay per manufacturer. I'm gonna dispose of this drain cleaner for you guys. So let's say you have a switch under here. If you look at the manufacturer specifications, at the mouth of the garbage disposal, there's supposed to be a line of sight switch, not in a cabinet, a line of sight switch within 3 feet of the mouth of a garbage disposal. You check if it's functional. It's functional. We have a switch 3 feet from it. If you have one in the cabinet, your builder has actually broken the code. And they'll say, well, there's no one in the code where it specifically says it has to be from that line of sight. At the beginning of every section, it says all devices shall be installed to manufacturer specification, and every manufacturer specifies a line of sight switch. Now on newer houses, the other thing I'll check for underneath here, other than the presence of P-traps, no leaks, so on and so forth, the clean out, is that there's a hammer arrestor between the dishwasher and the water line, a hammer arrestor to the fridge, and a hammer arrestor to the washing machine upstairs. That code actually came into existence in 2012 and newer, and this house was built under the 2003 code, so the hammer arrestors will not be here. So you will ask, what is a hammer arrestor? Well, a hammer arrestor is basically a shock absorber for your drain system. Any device that shuts off and turns on instantly will cause what's called water hammer effect, and these basically act as shock absorbers in your system. Okay, I gotta pause this and turn off this heater. This is killing me. Sorry, guys. A little side deal. Now, as I was telling you guys about the heater earlier, we had enough time to let this system switch over, so now our supply A coil is 124 degrees. The heater 110% works in this house. It is actually so oppressively hot in here right now, I'm having trouble keeping my lunch down. Back to the inspection. So you don't have to have a refrigerator to close on a house. You do have to have a dishwasher and a stove. Now, if it's a gas stove, we'll check it to make sure it's operable. We sometimes will check electric ranges, but that's not really as big of a deal for us. We want to make sure the gas is functional in the house, that you don't have any damaged regulators, no potential for gas leaks. Now per code, you're supposed to have a vent hood, but the vent hood in this house didn't make it. I'm not going to replace the vent hood, but you can have one on Amazon for about $76. And unlike a lot of houses that have electric stoves where they just recirculate your smoke, we actually have a direct vent to the outside. So whenever you set one up, make sure you set it to go outside. All right, moving on. Now you normally won't test many of these plugs. You'll spot test your plugs to make sure that everything seems to be wired correctly. But you won't press your breaker here. You verify that the vent fan works. Verify that the GFCI within 2 feet of a wet surface works. Verify that your toilet and sink works. And then you have hot water in the tub. I know this video is going to be long. It's a 2-story house, but bear with me, folks. And while it's running, you also make sure that there's no evidence of leakage underneath, which is dry. And all the hot water works. So in a bedroom, And I have an arc fault tester, but I don't have it with me because it's not my arc fault tester. It is property of the city that I work for, and I don't feel good using city resources for this. So we're gonna verify the wires appear to be wired correctly, but you can't use a GFCI tester to trip an arc fault. It just doesn't work that way. Arc fault's gonna see like an increase in power as just kind of business as usual. All right, so we're heading upstairs. Couple of codes to bear in mind. Any window within 2 feet of your door has to be tempered glass, so you'll look for these little embossments here to let you know that the window is indeed tempered. It's up there, and the one on the exterior is bottom corner. What's the difference between tempered glass and regular glass? If you break into this, it looks like car window when it shatters, turns into little squares, doesn't garrote you or impale you. Now per code, also tempered glass has to be within 24 inches of a perpendicular swing to a door, the end of the door, not within that swing. And also any window within 5 feet of the bottom of a stairway has to be tempered, which is right here on the landing, which has its rail required by code. And let's imagine here that we have a window right here in the landing. So the 3 by 3 foot area at the top of the stairs is considered a stair landing. Any window within that landing too has to also be tempered. In a stairway, you're required to have one light, a minimum of 6 foot 8 inches off the ground. Your head clearance can be no less than 7 feet at any time in a house except for in a restroom, which can be 6 foot 8 inches. So we just came back to the AC here, and our A coil's back down in the 60s, and we're trying to cool the house again. Whew. Tell you what, that's a pretty rough deal. One thing to bear in mind when you're caring for a system like this is you see these little vent hoses here? These are part of your condensate lines. So every 6 months or so, put down, well, every month if you want to, put down a vinegar solution, or every 6 months a water and bleach mix solution to keep them from backing up and slurrying and damaging your system. So heat and AC verified to work in here. Now normally at this point I would have the builder supply me a ladder and I'd poke my head in here to make sure there's 16 inches of insulation. I've been up in the attic a few times. There's definitely blown insulation, and there is a gasket around it to prevent any heat movement. This is a washer dryer connection. It's an older house, you're not going to have hammer arresters on it. That just is what it is. Dryer vent, and you have to verify that your dryer vent goes no more than 35 feet in one contiguous run, or 25 feet in newer codes. And it's actually not required by code that you have a vent fan in here. It's just added by everybody because they think it's code. They are, however, very much so required in a bathroom. So you verify that toilet flushes, the sink works. Turn on the hot water to the shower up here. And we have hot water. Got hot water, and we're all set here. Now normally I'd have a stick and I would check to make sure these all go off at the same time. Houses with no gas appliances and a detached garage are only required to have smoke detectors. Houses that were built after 2009 code, not 2009 physically, but the 2009 code, have to have CO detectors if there's an attached garage or gas appliances in the common areas. But this house was built in the 2003 code, so it was just interconnected smoke detectors. And I replaced all of the damaged ones from the painting activities before I had you guys view the house. So you'll see a lot of brand new smoke detectors in here. Verify that the wiring up here is correct. So there's no reverse neutral, no mislanded hots. This all seems nice and tidy. Also, we don't care if you have fans or not per code, we just have to have lights. Insect screens. Now any closet 3 feet or more in depth is required to have a light, which is the case. So far, so good. The only thing that I would tag this for, honestly, myself, right now would be the missing vent hood and insulation on the exterior hose bibs. This fan does work, but you press the switches down. But it's not part of an inspection. That would normally be something a track inspector looks at. So as a building inspector, we look for basic use and usability. Does it collapse on people? Does it catch on fire? Do the toilets flush? Do you get electrocuted? Stuff of that nature. Per our codes, we don't even have to have finished floors or carpet in place. So bear in mind, what a track inspector does and what a building inspector does is two different things. GFCI for this one, I believe, is in that bathroom. All right. Checking for hot water. So yes, you guys will see a little bit of water in this. That's because I am doing a full final inspection. And I want you guys to know that you're getting what you're asking for. All right, so we got hot water. No leaks. Hot water. Still no leaks. Functional toilet. Hot water in the shower. Hot water at the bath. And also, any window within 5 feet of a standing surface is required to be tempered. So these bathroom windows, the tempered embossment, that corner, top left, top right. So all these windows are tempered. I have a light in here. And bathroom vent works. So you're gonna get a question every once in a while. I heard that these windows upstairs have to have locks on them to keep them from opening more than 4 inches. That is only required if the height of the windowsill is less than 24 inches to the finished floor area. These are all 26 to 28. But if you were to have these lower, you would have opening protectors on there that would only let a kid lift them 4 inches. All right, so our supply is coming back down. Whew. Poor AC, I am sorry about that. Left the sink downstairs running. Also, for these stairway lights, you have to have a switch in the immediate vicinity of the top and bottom landing. Line of sight within 10 feet. And that's pretty much what we look for at a city final. So, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on the YouTube channel. I'm more than happy to answer questions, but that's where we're at. Now I'm just trying to get the house back down to a livable temperature. Well, in the meantime, have a good one, and I'll see you on the next one.